Hi guys, my name is Robin Gailunas, and I'm going to be talking about American history today. Thanks for joining me. I want to tell you a couple things that you're going to need and a couple of ways this is going to work. So you don't have to take notes unless you want to. You can, you're welcome to if you want to. The other way it is going to work is you should see a Q&A box. That's how I want you to write in if you have any questions or there's something you don't understand, or if I ask a question and you want to respond, write in the Q&A box, okay? Also, you might see the chat function, but we're not going to use the chat function or the raise the hand function. So if you want to raise your hand or ask a question, just type it into the Q&A and I'll try to answer the questions as much as I can. I see we have a couple of questions. Hi, Abel. Glad to have you back today. Hi, Emmy. And yes, I am a different person again today. I promised that I was going to wear a costume, and here I am. I'm a European explorer, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that has to do with American history. I realize I also maybe look a little bit like Jack Sparrow, but that wasn't my intention. I mean, like a European explorer. Hi, Alette and Elijah and Henry. So glad to have you guys back. Okay. Okay, good. Oh, Emmy, thank you for letting me know that you were here last time too. Okay, and Sophia asked, who are we learning about? Well, we're going to learn about a couple of specific people, but we're also going to learn about European explorers and what that had to do with the creation of the United States and America. Hi, Brittany. Hi, Sarah. Okay, so one of the things we are going to use today or learn about today is the use of a timeline. So there are lots of dates in history, and some are maybe more important than others, but knowing dates is helpful because it can help you see where things happened in relationship to other things. And so that's actually one of the reasons that you can use a timeline to help you with studying history. So I have an example of a timeline that one of my students has made that I will show you guys. So here we are doing American history with Robin. Sorry, just one second. So here is an example of a timeline that one of my students has made. So you can see it starts with 1200, and it's actually a really big piece of paper. So it goes very, very close to modern time, but I just took a picture of a small part of it. So you can see this, there's the beginning of the spice route, which we're gonna talk about in a little bit, and then some different people. If you're familiar with American history, you might see Columbus and his ships, which we're also gonna talk a little bit about. So that is just an example of how you could use a timeline. So the first European explorers, about 500 years ago, people from Europe started coming to America. They had many reasons for this, and as the years passed, they came in larger and larger numbers. Here are some reasons they came. They came to find gold and silver, or to claim the lands for their king, or they wanted the freedom to live and worship their God in the way that they chose. Have some questions. Let's see if I can answer those before I go on. Alette asked, did I find a George Washington costume? No, I haven't found one yet, but I'm still looking for one. And Brittany asks, what is a timeline? So a timeline is a way of making a line that shows historical events and where they are. So you might want to know, when Columbus sailed, when the first settlement in the United States happened, when the Civil War was. So all of those things you would put on a timeline, and they would help you see when that was. Thank you, Sernath. I hope I said your name right. I'm glad you like my costume. And Isaiah asks, when will we get to do a timeline? So what you can do is, if you have paper at home, you can actually start noting down the things that I'm talking about, because we'll be sort of building a timeline with that. And I have a whiteboard behind me that I'm going to write some of the things on. Okay, great. Avery asked if we're going to talk about the Civil War today. No, we're not going to talk about the Civil War today, because we're going to sort of move in historical order. So we have a few times before we're going to talk about the Civil War. Okay, great. So that's a little bit about European explorers. So I'm dressed as a European explorer, or the best costume I could come up with for a European explorer. So now, European explorers were coming to America, the New World, for many reasons. But before large numbers of Europeans began arriving, there were explorers from Europe, me, who found the way to America. The first explorers didn't know that the continents of North and South America existed, and actually found it by accident. So what were the explorers looking for? To answer that, we first have to look at what was happening a few hundred years ago. And before I talk about that, there's a word I want to make sure you understand, which is the word goods. Goods are things that you can buy or sell or trade. So when I talk about goods being traded or bought or sold, some examples would be the fabric silk, the spice cinnamon, gold, glass, ginger, other spices, horses, and a lot of other things. So when I talk about goods, that's what I mean. Let's see if I can get to some questions here. Andrew asks, what do we do the timeline on? And if you have paper at home, you can do the timeline on paper. Now it can be a big, huge timeline, or it could even just be on one sheet of paper. And Alette asks, what's the lacy frill at the front of your shirt? It's actually something I found in my costume closet, and I think it was maybe an apron originally, but I just decided to put it in the front of my shirt. OCPS Kids asked what would they use glass for? And they would use glass to put windows in their house or in their buildings or things like that. So glass was a way that they could actually let light in. Isaiah, I love cinnamon too, and it would be hard to imagine banana bread and oatmeal and all kinds of yummy things with it. Mitchell asks why the quotes are around the word accident. Well, because I put the quotes around the word accident because they weren't planning to discover a new world. They weren't thinking they were going to find anything besides what they were looking for, which they were looking for an area of the world called the Indies, a couple of islands where spices grew, which I'm going to talk about. But it wasn't when Columbus sailed, he wasn't planning to find a new world. He was just planning to find a way to get to the spices faster. Okay, good. I think that Henry, I did see your question. I think right now I'm going to be talking about some basics of history, and maybe with some more information about basics of history, we could talk about some more complex questions. Okay, good. Okay, great. So that's what was happening. So I have this map next. Oops, sorry, I went too far. So as you can see on this map, there are two routes, two ways that goods came from Europe to Asia and from Asia and Southern Asia back to Europe. What they would do is, it's such a long way to bring goods, right? What they actually did was they created what's called a network of trade routes that stretched thousands of miles from China to Persia and to the Mediterranean Sea. And a network is a system of things that are connected in a certain way. So these were a system of roads or a system of sailing routes. And you can see the red line is what we call the Silk Road. And it wasn't actually just one road, it was a bunch of different roads, but mostly silk traveled on it, which is why we call it the Silk Road. Okay, good. I see I have some questions. So let me just see if I can get to those. Mark, I'm going to talk about a little bit when I talk about Columbus about why he wanted to find a route for the West Indies. So hang tight and I'm sure I can answer that question. Okay, Henry asked at what time was this? And it was over 1,000 years ago. And so what happened was the people from Europe wanted to trade with the people that were in China and the different islands like that. Some things that they would trade, there were lots of things that traveled on the Silk Road besides silk, spices, gemstones like diamonds, rubies, paper, china, which is the material that like teapots and teacups are made of. And those would be traded from China and India and that area towards Europe. Trading the other way from Europe towards China was gold, glass. It's still crazy to me that they would carry glass all that way. Horses, perfume, and oranges. Isaiah asks, why are there more spice routes than silk roads? And the spice route, which was the next thing I was actually going to talk about, so thank you for asking that question, was a sailing route. So they found a way, and you can see it on the black dotted lines, to ship these things that they wanted, the spices and the goods. And I think that's actually why there were more of them, because it was easier to navigate with the boats and to ship them rather than carry them over land on camels and horses and in wagons and things like that. Oh, thank you, Alette, for telling me how to pronounce your name. I appreciate that. And Arabella asked, what's the difference between the Silk Road and the spice route? The Silk Road was over the land. And so there would be different trading posts. So you would maybe start in one place and you'd bring your ginger or your spices and you'd go to the first trading post and you'd trade it to get money. And so that was over land. The spice route was by water using ships. And Sophia asked, what else did they have on the Silk Road? They had things like paper, rubies, gemstones, spices as well, all kinds of things. Okay. And vanilla, you're right, Henry. Vanilla was another thing. And yes, were these items expensive at this time? Yes, they were. So here is my next, so you guys can see on my next slide. Spices were the most valuable thing traded on the Silk Road. Europeans wanted spices and would pay high prices for them. Black pepper, so everybody has black pepper now. When you salt and pepper your food, if you have like one of the little pepper crackers, was very popular because you could put it on any food and it would improve the taste. By the time it got to Europe and it had been traded many, many times at a higher price each time, it was more valuable than gold. So the reason it got traded many times was, let's say I had some horses. I don't want to bring my horses all the way from Europe, all the way to China. It's a really, really long way to travel. And so what I would do is maybe I would take my horses to the first trading post, sell a few of them, get some gold, go to the next one, sell a few of them, get some more gold, maybe go to the third one, sell the rest of them, get more gold or spices or things like that. And then I would bring it back to where I came from. So I didn't have to travel all of that way. So the things that they bought went from person to person, from trader to trader to trader so many times. And each time they were sold or bought for a higher price. So by the time you got to the end, it was a lot more expensive than it was originally. I hope that answers the question. Let's just see if there's any other. Yes, the spice routes are the red routes, the black, well, the spices are the red ones. Okay, great, thank you. Abel, I see your question. I think I got my colors mixed up. So let's go, we can go back and look at the thing. So here on my drawing, you guys can see they have the red ones being the silk and the black being the spice routes. Okay, great. Arabella asks, so like profit, they started at a price and it started to build up from there until it got to the last stop. Yes, so that's how something could be. Black pepper, for instance, could be as expensive as gold by the time it got to its final destination. And yes, this was in the 1200s. And it was all about making money, was all about making this profit, because the things that were traded on this road and these routes were things that were very high in demand at both ends. Milo, I didn't see your question. Can you send it again and I will try to answer it? And Aiden asked, wasn't ginger really, really expensive? Yes. So actually ginger is the spice that I was going to talk about next. So this is ginger. This is ginger root that I just bought at the grocery store a couple of weeks ago. And it was so valuable that in the year 300, which is 1,702 years ago, that a person who was a carpenter would have to work for 20 years to afford a pound of it, which is just crazy to me. So this is not a pound, but this would have taken me 4 years of working to afford this much. It seems really crazy today, but it gives you an idea of how valuable it was and how rare it actually was. Can you imagine working 20 years to afford something that flavored your food, something you were going to eat and then would be gone? That just is like, it's crazy. So that just shows you how it is. John, yes, there is a way that you can send me your finished timelines. I'll put up at the end, I'll put up what my email address is, and you can email it to me so that I can see it. Holly, it's okay that you joined us a little late. We're talking about spice and trade and things that came from Asia to Europe and what that has to do with the settling of North America. How long was the Silk Road? Well, I don't know the exact length, but if you wanted to go from Venice in Italy to Calcutta in India, it's 5,300 miles. So if you walked today from Venice in Italy to Calcutta in India, it would take you 1,730 hours to do that walking. And that's with modern roads and conveniences. It would have taken much, much longer to do that on camelback or horseback or in the back of a wagon or even walking when they didn't have as modern roads as we have. I hope that answers that. Emmy asks about salt. I think salt was just as valuable as these other things. I agree, it is crazy. Isaiah, I agree. I would also save up all my ginger so that I could have a lot of it. And you could probably even make some money if you weren't going to eat it all. Okay, good. I do think, Alette, I hope I said your name right. I do think some of the stuff got stolen. I think it was dangerous and hard to travel that. And there were probably bandits or robbers that went both ways, trying to steal the gold and the money and the expensive spices. Sarah, you ask a great question. Were those merchants called middlemen? Yes, they were. So imagine that I have two people next to me, and this person over here has bubble gum and they want to trade it with this person over here who has some candy. So instead of trading it directly, they go through me. So I'm like, okay, well, if you give me your bubble gum, I'll give you 2 quarters. And so then I buy it for maybe more than it's worth. And then I turn to the next person and I say, okay, well, I got bubble gum, but you got to pay me $1 for it. And they really want bubble gum. So then they pay me $1 for it. And I'm the person in the middle. I'm the middle man. So I've just made money off of trading with these people. Okay, good. So good. So many of the spices that we've traded, I think we already went over this a little bit, but they started, instead of putting them over land, they started shipping them by boats. And you can see on this all the way to the right where it says the Spice Islands. That was a group of islands around there where a lot of the spices that were in high demand grew. So because this was before airplanes, you know, they had to go by ship, and they had to ship them, which took a long time and was not easy. Okay, I think my next slide. Okay, so some of you might be asking, what does this have to do with America? So around 800 years ago, the spice trade was controlled by 2 groups, the Arab traders and the Venetians, who were people who lived in the city of Venice in Italy. Other European traders, not the Italians, wanted to find a route to the Indies that avoided the Arab traders and the Venetians, these middlemen that I was talking about. if they found a new route, they could still charge a high price and they'd keep most of the profit for themselves. Let's see, I have a couple other questions. Abel, that's a good point. I'm not sure why there's a spice route on Africa. Maybe because they shipped it as far as they could, and then they probably put it on camels or horses and then walked it the rest of the way. Sarah asked, did some people die on the routes? I'm sure they did. It was not an easy journey to make. I agree, Alette. I would definitely grow black pepper and sell it to get rich. I think part of it has to do with the climate or what the weather is like in the place. It just maybe grows better in those warmer, wetter places. Milo asked, did the ship sink? Yes, they did. We're actually going to talk about an explorer a little bit later on who lost 2 out of the 4 boats that he went with. So ship sinking was definitely a danger. Henry, I do think the middlemen probably kept spices for themselves, and they maybe then sold some to make even more profit. Okay, you guys have a lot of great questions. The people who make the spices, yes, you could call them the producers, but I think they also were farmers and, growers of the spices. Whoever lives with the peppers are rich. You are correct. They are rich. Sarah asked, what would they eat and drink if they ran out? They probably would have to find food somewhere. If they were traders, they would have a lot of things that they could trade if they got really desperate. The piece of ginger that they have might be looking pretty good to trade with somebody to get some water or to get some fresh meat. Great question, Sarah. Aiden, Mark asks, yes, if you had the spices, you were rich. And if you had a way to buy and sell them, you definitely were. Isaiah, I think they maybe saved their money so that they would have the money to buy those things. And people who had lots of money or gold to trade, like nobles or kings or queens, definitely were probably more likely to have spices than a carpenter. Andrew, the explorer I'm not talking about isn't Ferdinand Magellan. We may talk about him next time, but his name was Vasco de Gama, and he was a Portuguese sailor who went on a really long journey. Yes, the boats did hit rocks and sink, or storms happened, or anything could have happened, but I think it was between storms or hitting things or not having great maps, so maybe you ran into things. Okay. Okay, great. Arabella asks a really great question, which if you go from start to end, do you think the spice or food would be as good as when they started throughout all of the middlemen? That's a really good point. Obviously, this is a piece of fresh ginger, the ginger I have, so this wouldn't last very long. I think what they did was they ended up drying it and grinding it, much like the spices you guys have in your pantries or your kitchens that you use to make things with. And by drying it, it would last a lot longer. But they wanted it so much that they were willing to have it be not as great as when it started. That's how much they wanted it. Okay, great. Were there any pirates? I'm sure there were plenty of pirates that were looking to make some money and to get some of those things. Okay, great. So there's that. Let's look at my next slide. Okay, so this was a little bit more about why people started looking for a different way to reach India than the way they had, either the Silk Road or the Spice Route. Hopefully you guys can see it, but down here at the Spice Islands, there's a little arrow, and there's also a little arrow here by the top of Arabia. And those would be two places where the Arab traders would control the ships going to. So they might send a ship, you know, here all the way down to the Spice Islands, pick up some spices and sail them back. The area that is the circled area is the area that the Venetians controlled. So once those boats that had spices got into that area, it had to go all the way through the Venetians. It had to go through the Venetians. So they were kind of the two groups of people that were really controlling things. So people were like, we don't want to have to do that. We want to find something that's faster and better, and we can make more money. Andrew, I'm sure anybody who had money, woman or man, were able to buy those spices. Or if you had something they wanted to trade. Brittany, it is a really good question. Why would they pay so much for something that they were just going to eat and it would be gone? There were many different reasons that they wanted spices. One of them was because they didn't have refrigerators then, and the food wasn't always kept cold in the way that we imagine food should be kept today. So the spices helped with preserving it as well as making it taste better. And yes, Sarah, they did sell camels or horses at some point. So all these other Europeans are thinking, why do only the Arab traders and the Venetians get to control this and make all this money? So they started thinking of different ways that they could find a way to India themselves. Since there were no planes, the only way to find an alternate way to India would be by ship. So let's see if I have this map here. Good. So there is this map. So one of the ways that someone from Europe, where my little black line starts, could go is they could go down around Africa, they could stop in India, and they could go to the Spice Islands. That's a way. And Milo asked, if I were a sailor, which route would I take? Now, knowing everything I know about history and what maps look like, that's probably the route I would take. If I were in that situation, I'm not quite sure. I might be adventurous and try to go the other way. Sophia asks if pirates are real. There are people who were pirates at that time who would stop ships and take the things, the goods that were on them. Andrew asked, have I ever sold spices or goods to anybody? I haven't, but I like reading about it. And Sarah, I am sure that some merchants would scam their customers because a lot of it was about making money and making the most profit. Alette asked, did they know there was a North America or a South America? I'm not sure. I don't think they did, because they imagined, at least Christopher Columbus imagined, if he went west, he could easily find the Indies. So I don't think they imagined that it was there. And Isaiah asked, was it a hard route to travel or was it an easy way? And I think any of these routes were hard ways to travel. It took a lot of courage and bravery and hard work to make that happen. Okay, great. So this is one way the Europeans could go. But there was a problem. They didn't have a lot of technology for sailing the seas at that time. Sometimes they didn't even have great maps. So like I was just saying, when they didn't know North and South America was there, they didn't have a map that told them what land was there or which way was the best way to go. Besides not having maps, there were some other problems. There wasn't a good way to guide their ship. They could find the direction north, but not a whole lot more. And the boats weren't always great for taking long journeys, even if they had a map and could find their way. Even the boat was a problem. Andrew, yes, they did use a compass, but it wasn't the way we imagine a compass is right now. That would come a little bit later. How many years ago was this? This was probably, let me look at my note. Well, it was before 1492, so it was probably in the 1300s. Yes, they did find some goods in the United States, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. Sarah asked, some people still believe the world was flat, right? So yes, some uneducated Europeans believed that the world was flat, though many of the people who had been educated and navigators believed that the world was round. But they didn't have an idea of actually how big it was, which is one of the things we'll talk about when we talk about Columbus. Milo, I think they mostly traded in gold, possibly silver, so metals, and then in spices or things they could trade for gold. Okay, so there were people who tried to improve the technology of sailing or navigation. We're going to talk about one of those guys next. This guy's name is Prince Henry, and he was known as the navigator of Portugal. He was the third son of the King of Portugal, and he spent his life improving ships and navigation methods so that Portugal could become more powerful. He wanted his country to find a way to India and not have to travel through Europe and through the Middle East and Asia to get those spices. Okay, so here is the next thing, which this is a type of ship that he invented. It's called a caravel, and it was the finest ship at that time. So that was an improvement on the ships so that they could last for longer and longer journeys. So here is the other guy that I was telling you about. This is Vasco de Gama. He made it from Portugal to India. It took him 2 years to make that journey. So just imagine being on a journey for 2 full years. It's a long time. He also lost 2 of his 4 ships. They sank, and 2/3 of the men he brought with him died. But the spices that he brought back were worth 60 times the cost of the voyage. So while he lost ships and he lost men, these spices that he brought back, he was able to make a lot of money off of it. So it was worth it. That's why they would pay these money for these voyages, because the potential to make money was so great. Okay, sorry, I'm just looking at all your guys' great questions. I think think they had a lot of the same foods as us, though when they were traveling, they had to have foods that wouldn't go bad. So they'd bake these little biscuits or hard bread called hardtack, where they could eat it for a really long time and it wouldn't go stale or bad. Sometimes they even had barrels of pickles on the ships because they thought it would help keep them healthy. Ella asked, did women ever go on the route? I'm sure they did. Probably not by themselves, but it could be that they accompanied their husbands or fathers or brothers in order to do that. And Krish asked, what if they ran out of supplies? Well, if they ran out of supplies, then they would stop somewhere and try to trade whatever they had for what supplies they needed. So they'd have to, maybe they'd trade for fruit or fresh vegetables or meat with the things that they had. Isaiah, I don't think it was possible to bring 2 years worth of water and food. So I believe what I would do if I were the person planning it is I would plan enough to bring enough so that I could know that I was going to stop somewhere to restock on fresh water and food. Sophia asked, what would happen if the earth was flat? Well, I know that people who believed the earth was flat believed that the ship would just sail right off the side of it. Some even believed that there were sea monsters that lived beyond the end of the flat earth. And did they become healthy from the pickles? Well, when you go for a long time without eating fresh fruits or vegetables or having vitamin C, you can get a condition called scurvy, where your teeth become loose and you lose your teeth, and it's just not a really good, healthy way to be. And so the pickles helped with fighting that disease. Plus, if you like pickles like me, it was a good thing to have on hand. How did they prepare funerals when they died? I'm pretty certain that they wrapped them up in a sail and put them in the ocean, did burials at sea. Okay, great. What if they could not get water? What would they do? Well, I think, Isaiah, they would try as hard as they could to find water, and probably, like if you go on a hike or something, you plan how much water you have. So I'm sure that they were more on top of that and knowing like, okay, we have to pull into this port and we have to trade whatever we have for fresh water because we need it. Okay. Okay, great. So now you might be asking, oh, while the Portuguese were making all these improvements in sailing, the leaders of Spain were worried that they were going to miss out on a chance to make a lot of money in the spice trade. So Christopher Columbus, an Italian sailor, convinced the King and Queen of Spain that by sailing to the west, he could find a better route to the Indies. And here is a map of the first of Christopher Columbus's voyage in 1492. I'm just going to see if I can answer some of your questions. Oh, you are right. Thank you, whoever reminded me of what time it is. I appreciate it. That is actually all of the time that we have today. You guys asked some really great questions. Thank you for joining my webinar, and I hope that you learned something about the spice route and the Silk Road and all those things. So thank you so much for joining me.